Hello everyone, welcome to Eye on Africa. Here are your headlines on this Tuesday. A horrifying attack on several villages in northern Mozambique leaves 50 people dead. Authorities say the culprits are linked to the Islamic State Group. Fighting rages on in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Hundreds are dead and at least 3,500 refugees have spilled over the border into Sudan. And 150 Tanzanian opposition members have been arrested since last month's presidential and parliamentary elections. The United Nations is urging the country's leader to allow protesters to assemble peacefully. But first, at least 50 people have been beheaded and dismembered in gruesome attacks on several villages in northern Mozambique. According to state media and police, the attacks took place over the course of several days and were carried out by fighters linked to the Islamic State Group. Witnesses told local media that the fighters had driven residents of one village onto a football pitch before murdering them there. For more on this story, let's bring in Zenaida Machado, who is the Angola and Mozambique researcher at Human Rights Watch. Zenaida Machado, thank you so much for speaking to us. First of all, what more can you tell us about these attacks?
What we know so far is that this recent attack and this recent beheading took place in a district called Muidumbi, which is in the coastal area of Cabo Delgado. And Muidumbe has been under attack and has apparently been seized by the insurgents since last week. And that's where the beheadings took place. But it's important to note that those beheadings are not completely new in this conflict that started in October 2017. Beheadings have been used by the insurgents as a weapon of war. And many people have been beheaded in the past 3 years. We don't know the numbers, we don't know the extent of beheadings, and we don't know what particular group they are targeting. But what we know for sure is that as people are able to come out of the areas that they have been stranded for the past months, they are now able also to reach out to us, reach out to authorities, reach out to the local media, and tell the stories of what has been happening in their villages.
It's been quite difficult to get information about who exactly carried out those attacks. The fighters are believed to have pled allegiance to the Islamic State Group, but not much else is known.
No, not much is known because the group has not been very good at communicating in terms of what their objectives are and why they chose Mozambique or Cabo Delgado for that matter. Their alliance to ISIS was a surprise when sometime late 2018, ISIS itself claimed some of the attacks that had target security forces in the northern districts of Cabo Delgado. But what I can tell you at this stage is that this group started as a small group of locals that attacked some police station. Then they moved into attacking village, beheading civilians, but specifically target people in those villages. But now they've grown, and they've grown to the stage of being able, for example, to take control of some towns, which is the case of Mosimbo da Praia that was first seized in towards end of August, and they're still controlling the town. And now most recently the case of Muidumbi, which is where people are beginning to flee from.
Some analysts say that it's not only religion that could be involved in this situation. Some analysts are suggesting that unemployment, poverty could be a source of this anger. Do you believe that's credible?
I believe that the genesis of the conflict of Cabo Delgado involves several phenomena. The religious one could be one because a large part of the population there belongs to a certain Muslim, certain religious group. There is also an element of poverty and an even society where all those news of gas and oil discoveries have not really tracked down to the ordinary citizen, to that young man that has been unemployed for decades and is looking for an opportunity to survive and to feed his young family. But there is also an element of tribals. There are two major tribes in Cabo Delgado that don't seem to really managed to sort out their differences over centuries of existing. So there are a lot of elements playing around the conflict. I think at this stage, all we can do is to wait for the group itself to come up and their leadership to tell us what exactly they're intending to do.
Very quickly, Mrs. Machado, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they've also criticized the government for the way it has responded to past attacks carried out in the area.
Yes, we have also documented abuses from security forces, especially in their counter-terrorism operations. We know that security forces mishandle detainees. We know also that they arbitrarily arrest people, they harass people, they arbitrarily detain journalists who are simply reporting on what is going on. And most recently, many people have seen, we have come up with some videos that show security forces summarily executing people.
Okay. Zenaida Machado, the Angola and Mozambique researcher for Human Rights Watch, thank you very much for your time. The African Union has called for an immediate ceasefire in Ethiopia after hundreds of people were killed in violence there. The government sent troops and Air Force jets into the northern region of Tigray last week, but Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has rejected international pleas for dialogue until the operation is over. Nicolas Germain has the latest.
The conflict in Ethiopia is extremely difficult to cover. Foreign media was not allowed access to the Tigray region on Tuesday, and phone and internet services have been shut down. The president of the Tigray region accused Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki of supporting militarily his ally Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The two men know each other well. They signed a peace agreement 2 years ago.
بدحريت نائساس حايلي نائساس كبرت برتات أب حمرة.
The Tigrayan leader did not give proof of Isaias Afwerki's involvement, and Eritrea denied the accusation. Ethiopian state television said this was footage of people celebrating in the town of Dansha as the national army arrived. The broadcaster also said these Tigrayan militiamen had surrendered to the government.
For
nearly 3 decades, Tigrayans, who are a minority, dominated the Ethiopian government. But since the arrival in 2018 of Abiy Ahmed, who's from the largest Oromo ethnic group, they feel marginalized. Last week, Abiy Ahmed accused them of attacking an army base and launched a military operation against them. On Tuesday, the African Union called for the immediate cessation of hostilities.
The former president of Mali, Amadou Toumani Touré, has died at the age of 72. Touré was a former soldier and first began leading the country in 1991 after overthrowing the unpopular regime of Moussa Traoré. Touré, who was nicknamed the Soldier of Democracy, won presidential elections in 2002 and again in 2007. Toward the end of his rule, neighboring countries began accusing him of ignoring the spread of jihadists in northern Mali. In 2012, soldiers who accused Touré of not supporting their battle against jihadist insurgents ultimately deposed him. The former president was forced to flee to Senegal, where he lived for 5 years before returning to his home country. The United Nations say at least 150 members of Tanzania's opposition have been arrested over the course of the past 2 weeks following fiercely disputed elections in the country. Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says the arrests began on the eve of the October 28th vote. That election saw President John Magufuli win 84% of the vote. The main challenger, Tundu Lissu, won just 13%. According to a party spokesman, Lissu left the country for Belgium this Tuesday, where he is expected to undergo health treatments and open a new political battle. France 24's Mukelo Halatrayo has more from Nairobi.
The United Nations High Commission on Human Rights has today called for a thorough and independent investigation into all allegations of rights abuses before and after last month's elections in Tanzania. She highlighted the killing of at least 10 people and injuring of more than 50 in the Indian Ocean archipelago of Zanzibar. President John Magufuli was announced the winner of the election, which was marred by violence. Opposition and rights groups say it was rigged. The Electoral Commission denies it. Magufuli was inaugurated last week in a ceremony in the capital, Dodoma. He pledged to create employment opportunities and fight corruption. Numerous opposition politicians were arrested following the elections after they rejected the results and called for protests. The spokesperson of ACT, an opposition party, is currently here in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, receiving medical treatment after he was attacked by police last week. The main opposition party leader, Tundu Lissu, has fled to Belgium, where he previously lived in exile after surviving an assassination attempt nearly 3 years ago. He says that he has received death threats since disputing the poll results and calling for his supporters to demonstrate. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has called on the government of Kenya to grant asylum to a former member of Tanzania's parliament who has fled the country after he said that he was also threatened. Rights groups have expressed concern about the shrinking civic and media space since Magufuli came into power 5 years ago. The disputed election results almost completely eliminated opposition parties from parliament. They say they expect the next 5 years will see more repressive legislation to silence government critics, target journalists, and restrict civil liberties.
That does it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thomas Waterhouse will be with you in just a moment as Live from Paris continues on France 24.